Starting Parak Aleph. Last week we did a kind of a bird's eye view of the whole Sefer, kind of overview of themes, which jumping into the text today, Mahi Achrei Mot Yoshua. Entitled today's Shir, the impact, the aftermath of the death of Yoshua. We'll see why that is the case, but the book certainly starts after the death of Yoshua. וישאלו בני ישראל בהשם לאמור, מי יעלה לנו על הכנעני בתחילה להילחם בו? They went and asked God, saying, who should go first against the Canaanites to fight them? Asking God essentially is another way of asking the Urim V'Tumim, the Kohen's breastplate, which was not uncommon for preparation for battle. We see it in a few different places in Sefer Shoftim. We see it in Sefer Shmuel more so because David Melech was and Shaul to some extent, but more David used that tool and it's referenced with regards to David a lot. In Shoftim, it has a few places, and we will identify them at some point. But they asked God who should fight first, who should lead, and the answer was Yehuda. V'yomer Hashem Yehuda Ya'aleh. Yehuda should go first. Not uncommon, and we'll see that Yehuda led. If you go to Chumash, you see the way in which they marched through the Midbar in Bamidbar Perek Bet. And I think we talked about this a little bit in Yoshua too. Yehuda's tribe and Degel went first. So Yehud, and later at the end of Sefer Shoftim, the story of Pelegish Begiva, with all of its complexities, they again asked the Urim V'Tumim, they asked God who should go first, and God's response there too was Yehuda, but Rishon Yehuda should go first. So that seems to be a recurring pattern. Hinei natati et haaretz biyado. I have given the land into his hands. Vayomer Yehuda l'Shimon achiv. Yehuda then turned to his brother Shimon and said to him, Ale iti b'gorali v'nilachama b'kna'ani v'alachti gam ani itacha b'goralecha. You, Shimon, come fight with me in my fight against the Canaanites, and then I will go and help you in your goral, in your portion as well. Vayelech ito Shimon, and so they go together. Yehuda goes first. Yehuda went up, and God gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hands. And they smote them in Bezek. We're going to come back to the question of where and what is Bezek in a few minutes. And the battle ensued. Aseret alafim ish, 10,000 men. They found Adoni Bezek. Adoni Bezek is like Malki Tzedek. Right? It's the king of Bezek, Adon Bezek. In Bezek, they fought against him. They were victorious against the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Vayanos Adoni Bezek, Vayadufu Acharav, and Adoni Bezek ran. They ran after him. They caught him. And what comes next sounds very cruel and very harsh and very un-Israel-like. They cut off the thumbs and the thumbs of his hands and legs. But when you read the next verse, you understand why. Vayomer Adoni Bezek, Shivim melachim be'onot yadayim v'ragleim mekutzatzim hayu melakatim tachat shulchani. 70 kings have their thumbs and toes cut off and are scavenging under my table, meaning they are living under my rule and under my control. As I have done, so God has repaid me, meaning this is retribution to me for what I have done in the past. And they brought him to Yerushalayim, and he died there. More or less, that's the part of this is, for today's shir, I really want to focus on this opening story. But to put it in perspective and to see a context, I'm just going to read the next part of it very briefly, so we have a sense of of where to put And you'll understand the questions that we're going to ask with regards to this story about Adoni Bezek. Continuing from that story, Judah fought against Yerushalayim, smote by the sword, and they set the city on fire. Then they went down to fight against the Canaanites in the mountains and in the south. They fought against Hebron, conquered Hebron. The three giants or children of Bnei Anak that were there, Sheshai, Achiman, and Tamai. They conquered the city of Dvir, and there was a man by the name of Kalev ben Yefuneh. We're familiar with Chumash. V'yomer Kalev ashiyaket ki atzefu lechadav v'natatilo et achsa biti leisha. If you will conquer ki atzefer, meaning Dvir, which was a major Canaanite city, I will give you my daughter as a wife. Vayilkada Otniel ben Knaz echi Kalev hakaton nimenu. It was conquered by Otniel ben Knaz, Kalev's younger brother. Vayiteno et achsa bito leisha. And he was given Kalev's daughter as a wife. She came to her father and she fell off the camel. Kalev said to her, what is this? You gave me the south, you gave me the desert, but we need water. We don't have any sources of water. And I'm going to stop there for now. Actually, maybe one more verse. I'm going to skip Pasuk Tet Zayin. Pasuk Yud Zayin. Vayelech Yehuda et Shimon achiv. Shimon had gone with Yehuda, so now Yehuda went with Shimon. ויכו את הכנעני יושב צפת ויחרימו אותה ויקבע את שם העיר חורמה וילכד יהודה את עזה ואת כבולה ואת אשקלון ואת כבולה ואת עקרון ואת כבולה. They conquered the area of Chorma, and then they went further south and took Aza and Ashkelon and Ekron. God was with Yehuda, v'hi Hashem et Yehuda v'yoresh atah. Okay. More or less, I've gone further than I had intended to. What is clear from these psukim, and I'm going to start with this observation, is that more or less everything from Pasuk Chet through the continuation of the story, for anybody who had been in our study of Sefer Yehoshua, should sound familiar. Because this story from Pasuk Chet until the end, almost verbatim, appears in Sefer Yehoshua. We go back to Sefer Yehoshua, Parak Tetvav, and we talk about the various kfulot of the various borders that were assigned to each of the tribes of Israel. And Parak Tetvav deals with the tribe of Judah, and there we read, starting with Pasuk Yudalid, ויואש משם כלב את שלושה בני ענק את ששי ואת אחימן ואת תמי ילדי ענק ויער משם יושבי דביר ושם דביר לפנים קיית ספר ויאמר כלב אשייקט קיית ספר לחדה ונתתי לו את אכסה ביתי לאישה וילכדה עתניאל בן כנז אחי כלב וייתן לו את אכסה ביתו לאישה ויהי בבואה ותסיתה לאישו מאת אבי השדה ותצנח מעל החמור ויאמר לה כלב מלאך ותאמר תנה לי ברכה כי ארץ הנגב נתתני ונתתה לי גולות מים. I didn't translate because it's literally verbatim the same story that we just read now in Shoftim. So that tells me that at least on some level, this chapter that we're studying now in Shoftim, Parak Aleph, has pieces that are chronologically out of place. And that it's a kind of a review, at least in part, and we're going to see whether that applies to the first part as well. It's a review of events that had occurred earlier in the time of Yehoshua. Yehoshua was still alive. And in fact, that's what some of the Mefarshim say. The Radak says on Vayelech Yehuda l'Knani, when it describes how Yehuda went down to the Knani of Yerushalayim and Devir and Kiryat Arba, etc., says the Radak, Pirush ukva halach. You'd already done this. This all occurred in the days of Yehoshua. And similarly, the story of Otniel ben Knaz. It's all in Sefer Yehoshua. So at least a good part of this parak is a review of events that had occurred earlier, which brings us to the first question, which is, if that's in fact earlier, why does it say Vayachim Mot Yehoshua? So what impact, what connection is there to the death of Yehoshua to the rest of the stories in the chapter? Some of them are certainly later stories, and some of them are much earlier. Clearly, the story of Yehuda's conquest of the south of the area of the Negev is much earlier. What do we do with this first story of Bezek? Is the story of Bezek and the conquest of Bezek and the capture of Adoni Bezek and the retribution against Adoni Bezek, is that also an earlier story? Or is it a later story? Right? They seem to run one into the other. Everything from Pasuk Chet and on is certainly earlier. What about the early psukim, which begins, Vahi acharei mot Yehoshua? So that's my first question. The chronology of this first event, what is the connection to the death of Yehoshua? The second question has to do with this war against Bezek. There's a lot of description here of the battle against Bezek and the city of Bezek and the king of Bezek and what he said and who should go first and Yehuda should go first. He asked him for something. There's a lot of details here that we don't get in the rest of this chapter and the other conquests. We just get who did conquer and who didn't conquer and who did and who didn't and what was left and what wasn't left. There seems to be an inordinate amount of detail in this opening story that doesn't seem to match the rest of the parak. And so our questions revolve around essentially these two primary issues. What is the nature, what is the significance of the story of the battle against Bezek? Where is Bezek? What is Bezek? And the connection between that and the death of Yehoshua. I'm going to throw one more piece into the puzzle, and that is just a sideline, which is the relationship, which seems to be part of the story, between Yehuda and Shimon. Why is that significant? Yehuda should go first. Before we get to the battle, we're going to stop and tell us that Yehuda invited Shimon to join him, and they shared their goral. What does it mean to share their goral? They share their goral means that I will give you a portion, or I will help you conquer your territory if you help me in my battle. What is the significance of that? We do find a little bit later back in Yehoshua, but a little bit later in Yehoshua, as they're going through the various tribes and their goralot and their portions, we find in chapter 19 of Yehoshua, so Shimon had a unique status. What was unique about the territory of Shimon? It was that Shimon was not given their own contiguous tribal region, as all the other tribes were. They were given an inheritance inside the tribe of Judah. Cities. For example, city of Beersheba, city of Chatzar Shu'al, city of Tziklag, various cities that were given to Yehuda that were originally part of the territory of Yehuda. And that's how the story ends. Mechevel b'nei Yehuda nachalat b'nei Shimon. B'nei Shimon were given a portion of land inside b'nei Shevet Yehuda. Ki ha'chelet b'nei Yehuda rav v'nachalu b'nei Shimon b'toch nachalatam. Yehuda had a large territory, and he gave part of it to Shimon. Why he gave part of it to Shimon? Maybe it has something to do with, well, there's two pieces. One piece of the story is that Shimon doesn't get their own territory or their own nachala. That part of the story we're going to talk about separately in a separate shir, Bezrat Hashem, next week. So that's completely a separate issue. What he does end up getting is a portion of land with Yehuda. Why that is the case maybe has something to do with our story. Yehuda offered him, come fight with me and I will help fight for you in your territory as well. Okay, so those are the big questions. What is the nature of this war with Bezek? What's the relationship to the death of Yehoshua? And the chronology here, which starts with a story that seems to be after the death of Yeshua and then jumps back to a story earlier. I actually want to start with another question. And we'll come back to all these. The first question I want to really begin with is, where and what is the city of Bezek? Because there's a lot of focus here on this war with Adoni Bezek, to the point where they consider Adoni Bezek so cruel. He had taken captives as kings in the region under the authority of Adoni Bezek, and Adoni Bezek had tortured them and had cut off limbs from them as a sign of slavery or servitude. And the Israelite tribes, when they conquered and they finally took Adoni Bezek, they did the same to him. What does that have to do with it? After the death of Yeshua? The situation is completely different. The Canaanite, Israel is in control of the land. The Canaanites are scattered. There might be Canaanite little bubbles of territory inside the Israelite conquest, but for the most part, the Balabatim here are Israel. What suddenly is the issue of Adoni Bezek and his cruelty have to do with anything? So I want to start with the basic question of where is Bezek? And I'll start with, let's call it, I would say, the classic interpretation and the significance of it, and then I'll share with you maybe an alternative contemporary interpretation that, again, revolves around the question of where is this city of Bezek. The simplest explanation, or sort of let's call it the traditional explanation of the city of Bezek, appears in Rashi and in other Mefarshim as well, where it says, Mi alalanu ala Knani, who is going to take us to fight against the Canaanites, amakomochi palnu b'garal, those places that have fallen in our portion to our garal, meaning we're in the tribal territory of Judah. Not expect anything else. And there are portions of Judah that have not yet been conquered, v'adayin lo nichbashu. So the answer is Yehuda should go first, and they go and they fight Bezek. Vayaviyeu Yerushalayim, and they bring Bezek, and they bring the king of Bezek to Yerushalayim, and there he eventually dies. Shalchum misham lilachem al Yerushalayim. Says Rashi, the reason why this is mentioned is because after they finished Bezek, the next city on their route is the city of Yerushalayim, which is essentially looking at the text in sequence. They finished the battle of Adoni Bezek, or the city of Bezek, V'yaviyeh Yerushalayim, because the next pasuk says, Vayilachamu b'nei Yehuda b'Yerushalayim. And they brought him to Yerushalayim because they fought in Yerushalayim. Right? That's the sequence of events is exactly there, the transition between pasuk Zayin and pasuk Chet. The events of pasuk Chet till the end of this section of Yehuda we saw in Yoshua as happening much earlier. There's a chronological jump here. Rashi doesn't seem to be bothered so much by the chronological jump. They go from Bezek to Yerushalayim, which, if you look in the Dat Mikra, this is a photocopy of, this is on the source page, a photocopy of the Dat Mikra commentary on Sefer Shoftim. The map on this story places the city of Bezek just southeast of Yerushalayim. And so essentially saying into the territorial route of Yehuda southward, everything from Yerushalayim south is Shevet Yehuda. Yehuda fights for Yerushalayim, and then he goes and he fights Hebron, and then he goes and he fights for Devir, and then he goes further south, Beersheba. This is the route that Yehuda takes, and Bezek is one of those cities along the route. And so there is a flow from the first half of the story of Yehuda against Bezek, and the second half, which is the conquest of the rest of Yerushalayim, that would seem to reflect that the timetable of this story is early. Because the stories of the conquest of Hebron and Kalev and Othniel ben Knaz and the story of Gulot Ilit and Gulot Tachtit and the daughter of Kalev who comes to her, all of that is in Sefer Yoshua. That's all before Yeshua dies. That's all when when the national army has been disbanded and each tribe is conquering their own territory, and Yehuda Perek Tetvav goes first. And so that question of Mi alelanu larishana, who should go first, Yehuda should go first, is a question already asked in Sefer Yoshua from the moment Yoshua challenges them to go and fight for each and settle in their land. In other words, according to this interpretation, the story of Vahi Acharei Mot Yoshua is a kind of a parenthetical aside. We're going back in time, first to start with the story of the conquest of Canaan, who was successful, who wasn't successful, what territories were taken, what territories weren't taken. We're going to start back in chapter 15 of Yoshua, when we read the story of the conquest of Goral of Yehuda, and we read the borders, and then we read the story of the conquest of Yerushalayim and the conquest of Devir and of Hebron, and the story of Caleb. All of that took place back then. We're reviewing it here, and then at the end of the story, chapter 2, we'll pick up at the end of the story of Yoshua, the continuation from the story of the death of Yoshua.
It's a story of thumbs up as opposed to thumbs off, isn't it?
Okay. So in other words, according to this, the story of Bezek and Adoni Bezek, which is not in Sefer Yoshua, is an oversight, meaning it's all part of the same story, the conquest of Judah in the south. It could have easily have been in Sefer Yoshua. It was put here. The rest of the story of Yehuda from Sefer Yoshua is here, and it's one contiguous story. And Yehuda took Shimon because the plan was for Shimon to have territory in the land of Judah, as I showed you in Yoshua. And so he offers him, he says, you come with me and I'll come with you. And we see that later in this Shoftim Perek Aleph chapter 2, because it says after they finish this conquest of Gulot Hamayim and Hebron, etc., Vayelech Yehuda et Shimon Achiv, Yehuda goes and conquers together with Shimon, in which he gives them the cities, and they fight together. All of that is assuming that this opening story of Bezek is part of the sequence of the early conquests of Judah in the south. Judah is one of the only tribes who's completely successful in his conquest of his territory, in the settling of his territory, and that's this map here places Bezek as part of the conquest of Yerushalayim. Okay. So far, everybody with me? I haven't said anything remarkable. This is basically just, I would say, the classic approach to this story. There's several problems in this interpretation. One I've already identified, which is that this story from Mi Yaleh Lanu Laknani Vatchila Vayomer Hashem Yehuda Yaleh, that conversation with Yom V'Tumim doesn't appear in Sefer Yoshua. The conquest of Bezek, the battle with Bezek, 10,000 soldiers. Right? This is a major battle. This isn't a skirmish. This isn't a city. This is an army of 10,000 soldiers that was conquered and vanquished. And Adoni Bezek and his cruelty, none of that's in Sefer Yoshua. All of that's here. Assuming it's one chronological sequence, so be it. But it's difficult to understand why it was not included in Yoshua. The most difficult question of all, however, is this description of Bezek, of Adoni Bezek, as being master of 70 kings. V'yomer Adoni Bezek, shiv'im melachim bonot yodehem b'ragleim ukutzatzim hayu melakatim tachat shulchani. Adoni Bezek, who maintained a kind of almost a mini empire. He had 70 kings under his control. Just to put in perspective, what does it mean? Bonot yodehem b'ragleim ukutzatzim tachat shulchani. What would it mean, the significance of having cut off their thumbs of their hands and of their legs? What a cruel thing to do. So on the one hand, it's in biblical terms, it was a way of demonstrating servitude, right? You branded your slaves. Torah forbade branding slaves. If you maim a slave, you set them free in the Torah. But here he demonstrates this kind of control by branding them. But it also gives us a sense of how cruel the Canaanite kings were. I'll show you an interesting example. If we take a quick glance at Shmuel Aleph, Perek Yud Aleph, and that Perek in particular I'll come to for a reason, we have a different battle altogether. Many years later, the days of Shmuel, or Shaul, Vayal Nachash HaAmoni, king by the name of Nachash, king of the Ammonites. came and he besieged the city of Yavesh Gilad. Yavesh Gilad was the capital of the area of the Gilad on the east side of the Jordan. Vayichan al Yavesh Gilad. So the people of Yavesh Gilad said to the king, they didn't want a war with him. Make a brit with us, make a covenant, make an agreement with us. We'll serve you, we'll surrender. State your terms. We don't have the army to fight against you. State your terms, we surrender to you. I'll make a deal with you. You want a brit? I'll make you a brit. Every person gouges out their right eye. You agree to those terms, and you can be my servants, and I'll make you my slaves. No problem. The people of Yavesh Gilad were a little smarter than that, and they weren't about to go and do that, so they turned to the tribes west of the Jordan River, and Shaul will come to their aid. Okay, we'll come back to that story in a few minutes. But that is a demonstration of the nature of the cruelty of the Canaanite kings. So when you see Adoni-Bezek, Canaanite king of Bezek, and he says, I have 70 kings who are slaves of mine, malaktim tachat shulchani, scavenging under my table, meaning they live off my generosity, then you understand that we're dealing with a master, we're dealing with a major mini empire, if you will, or a powerful king in the Canaanite arena. Hard to imagine Adoni-Bezek, king of Bezek, here south of Yerushalayim, in the time of post-Yeshua, when Israel is control of this entire region, it's hard to imagine a king in this area saying, I have 7, even if kings in those days meant kings of cities. They weren't kings of countries, they were kings of cities. Even so, where do you have 70 cities in this area that are going to claim their loyalty to Bezek when Judah is in control of the region? For after the death of Yeshua. So you put all these questions together, and then there's one more question, which is that we have no evidence to a city in the area of Yerushalayim by the name of Bezek. Israel has an electric company called Bezek, but we have no king and no city in Israel by the name, or in that region, that goes by the name Bezek. So there's no archaeological digs, it's nothing. So to put Bezek here is it possible? Sure, there are lots of biblical cities we don't know their location, of which we don't know their location, but there's enough evidence here to suggest that maybe we're looking in the wrong place. And in fact, there is a city of Bezek. There is an archaeological dig today called Tel Bezek. There is an area that is known in Arabic as Khirbat Ibzik, or the Horva of Bezek. There is a river, Nachal, called Nachal Bezek in the same region. All of this is true, but the area of Bezek we're looking for is not south of Yerushalayim. The city of Bezek that is the subject of all of this, the Tel Bezek and the Khirbat Ibzik and Nachal Bezek, is north, south of the sort of the mountain range that ends in Har Gilboa, south of Emek Beit Shan, sort of just at the southeast tip of Emek Yisrael, if you will. This, if I showed you on a map, this is the same map that's on the source page. If I showed you in a contemporary overlay of this map, this area is somewhere between Shechem and Jenin. So not necessarily an area that I would recommend going to today so easily, but there is such a place called Khirbat Ibzik on the map, and there's a Nachal there called Nachal Bezek, and there's an archaeological dig there called Tel Bezek. Not only that, if you look at the location of Bezek on this map, let's take out contemporary. If I just look at this map, and I just cross the Jordan River, and I look over to the right side, what do I find? The city of Yavesh Gilad. What's the significance of the city of Bezek being so close to the city of Yavesh Gilad? Let's go back to that story in Shmuel for a minute. After Nachash Ammoni makes his threat to the people of Yavesh Gilad, the people of Yavesh Gilad very cleverly say to the king of Ammon, "Give us 7 days, and we'll respond to you." They send messengers to Givat Shaul, and they tell them this was the negotiation with the king of Ammon. He wants to we should gouge out our right eyes before he'll make a peace treaty with us. And the people open up, they fall on their faces, they open up their voices, and they cry. Meaning they heard the story and they began to weep. Poor Yavesh Gilad. Poor Yavesh Gilad. They're going to all lose their right eye. Poor Yavesh Gilad. What they haven't done is responded by saying, we'll do something about it. Right? That's part of the tragedy. That's part of the internal dynamic of the story. V'nei Shaul, who had just been anointed king, Shaul comes. V'yomer Shaul, mala am kivku, and he doesn't understand why they're all crying. So they tell him the story. So the Spirit of God comes upon Shaul, and he gets angry. And there's a little bit of a sidebar here because part of the story is the aftermath in reaction to the story of Pilagish Pegiva. We're out of sequence, so I'm going to skip a little bit. But Hashem al ha'am gathers all the people together, and the entire army, all of Israel, and Ke'ish Echad to go to war in defense of Yavesh Gilad, which is what should have happened in the first place. Meaning, instead of crying poor Yavesh Gilad, they should have organized into an army to defend Yavesh Gilad against the army of Ammon. Okay. So Shaul gathers all his armies together, and we'll see he gathers an army of 300,000 soldiers. That is not a small army. Vayifkedem b'Bazek, and he counted them in the city of Bezek. He took a census of his army. He gathered his army together. He threatened anybody, if you don't come to this army, you're gonna be in trouble. And he had an army of 300,000 from Israel and 30,000 from Judah. And the rest of the story is Sefer Shmuel stuff. But where are they? They're in Bezek. Now, if Bezek is just here on the other side of the river, opposite Yavesh Gilad, it makes sense to have gathered there to fight against Yavesh Gilad, right? To defend Yavesh Gilad against the army of Ammon. That makes sense. If Bezek is here south of Yerushalayim, right? South of Yerushalayim, I'm going to put Bezek down here. What's he gathering his army for down south in order to go to war with Yavesh Gilad? Unless you want to say there's two cities by the name of Bezek, but the Mefarshim don't seem to go there. Most of the Mefarshim suggest that the city is in the same city, Bezek. Bezek, Shem Makom, says Rashi, Hanizkar b'Sefer Shoftim. It's the same place mentioned in Sefer Shoftim. Dak also similar. So, if in fact, now let's go back to our story. If in fact the city of Bezek is north, understand what that means, right? That means that it's in the tribal territory of Menashe. This has nothing to do with Judah. North, we're in the tribal territory, in the area of Emek Yisrael, we're in the tribal territory of Menashe. Sorry, I forgot to pull that map up. Sorry, let me just do this quickly. Emek Yisrael is this area here from the sort of along this road from Carmel all the way down to Beit Shan. This whole valley is a tribal territory of Menashe. Menashe's Yisachar, Zvulun, essentially they all border in the same region. What's Judah in the south doing all the way up in the fighting in Menashe against this Bezek, Canaanite king? Everybody see the problem? It's a problem either way. If Bezek is south, I don't understand why Shaul is down there when he's gathering his forces against Ammon to defend Yavesh Gilad. If Bezek is in the north, what's Judah doing in the north? So, assuming for a moment that we take the approach that Bezek is in fact in the north, we have to reinterpret the story. And so I'm going to take the story from Pasuk Aleph through to Pasuk Zion, right? This whole piece about Bezek. I'm going to take the assumption that this part of the story is in fact not connected to what comes after it. What comes after it is a recap from Yoshua. This story is in fact Vahi Acharei Mot Yoshua. And it's an isolated story, but it's a very important one. And it highlights, perhaps, again, assuming our basic question starts from where is Bezek? If Bezek is in the north, it highlights for us one of the big question marks, which is what was the impact of the death of Yoshua? Somebody asked me, I think in an email or recently, I don't remember the context, why doesn't Yeshua appoint a successor? Yeshua does not appoint a successor. It's one of the major issues. But beyond the question of appointing a successor, the aftermath of the death of Yoshua is an important moment. Chazal reflect on this moment in a very cryptic midrashic source. If you remember the way in which Yeshua's death is burial is described, and it's described both in Yeshua and in Sefer Shoftim. Show you quickly in chapter 2. It says, it recaps a little bit of Yeshua's life. Yeshua sends the people home, back to their land. Yeshua is still alive at this point. And the people served God all the days of Yeshua and all the days of this kingdom after Yeshua. Vayamot Yeshua benu neved Hashem. Yeshua died at the age of 110. And that also raised a question which we didn't really address, which was the chronology of Sefer Yeshua. He spends 7 years conquering. Let's assume equivalent amount of time settling up the tribes in the different territories and settling them. And that's what Chazal called the 7 years of Kibush. That's 14 years. He dies at 110. He doesn't enter into the land of Israel at the age of 90-something or 80-something. He is much younger. So we're assuming that this book of Shoftim the book of Yeshua's is more than just the 14 years. Seder Olam Rabbah places another 14 years of the story. It says it's 28 years long, maybe even longer. Whatever it is, there's a period of time after Yeshua finishes the conquest before he dies. He's buried in his territory, B'timnat Bar Ephraim, Mitzvon LaHagash, north of, to translate it literally, north of the volcano. Hargash is a volcano. There is no volcano, active volcanoes in Israel, and certainly not in the area of Har Ephraim. What is mitzvah Hargash? So Chazal pick up on this mystery of this term, right? Clearly not referring to a literal volcano, but they pick up on this characteristic describing as Yeshua's burial related to this Hargash in a very cryptic midrashic statement that says the following. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, Kol hamit'atzel behespedo shel chacham. Anybody who is lazy or procrastinates or doesn't properly accord the respect due to the death of a chacham in his eulogy, he forfeits his life. It's as if he should be buried alive, meaning the person who is negligent in and lazy or procrastinates or does insufficient in his hesped of a chacham. From where do we know this? Shene'emar, this verse I just showed you. Melamed sheraгаsh alehem har lohorgan. It teaches us that the mountain raged against them to kill them because they did not eulogize Yeshua properly. Really an extraordinary statement in the Gemara, and it's a mysterious one. Yeshua, who they loved, who they were loyal to, and they served God all the days of Yeshua, and then he dies, and they didn't give him proper eulogy. They didn't give him proper kavod. And the result was Chazal saw in this Hagash a cryptic critique of the people as if now the mountains are going to rage against them. What's going on? So the truth is that I think Chazal in a very cryptic midrashic way are highlighting for us a profound difference in perspective, the death of Yeshua, between how Israel saw the death of Yeshua and how the Canaanites saw the death of Yeshua. Meaning, let's assume for the moment that the period of time between the end of the conquest, the end of the time that Yeshua led the people, and he led them with an army, and he fought against the Canaanites, and he led them into the land of Israel, and he did miracles for them, extraordinary things. And now he finished the conquest, and he had a big speech with them, and he went home. How many years passed? Doesn't say. But let's assume for the moment 10 years passed, 20 years passed, 30 years passed. Israel is sitting in their land. Each Shevet is in their Nachala. Everybody is kind of settling in, each tachat kafno, v'tachat tenato, each person under the fig tree. And Yeshua is living to the end of his life. At 110, he dies, and they buried him. As they say, okay, everybody lives, Halavai, 110. Everybody lives a certain amount of time, and then they die. So he died. And we move on to the next leader of Israel. And so from the perspective of Israel, they gave him a burial, they gave him a eulogy, but he hasn't been the leader of Israel for decades. However, from the perspective of the Canaanites, the death of Yeshua is a totally different moment. Because for the Canaanites, what Yeshua represented was a warrior and a leader who took the Israelites into the land of Israel and decimated them. And one war after another, they gathered together in the south to fight against Yeshua, and Yeshua destroyed them. They gathered together in the north against Yeshua, Yeshua destroyed them. Then he sent each tribe to gather together their territory and to settle. And before you know it, 20 years after they entered into the land of Israel, the entire landscape, political landscape of Israel has been transformed completely. And the Canaanites have been subdued. And they sit there quietly in their place for many years. Nobody anticipates that they're sitting and waiting for Yeshua to die. And the moment Yeshua's death, Yeshua, suddenly we read about a Canaanite king by the name of Bezek, or Adoni Bezek, the city of Bezek in the north, in the area of Menashe, who begins to assert himself and take control of 70 kings and 70 cities and begin to take a region and begin to take a territory. And it's not just any territory. This area of Emek Yisrael, actually, there's a better map. This map we've seen before. We're going to see it many times in the Sefer Shoftim. This area of Emek Yisrael, between Menashe, Yisachar, and Zvulun, you see all the yellow, all the Canaanite, that's all Canaanite. The orange is Israelite. But this area of Emek Yisrael is central, is core to strategic control in the land of Israel. Because, I'm going to zoom out for a moment, do you see these little orange lines? Pay very careful attention to these orange lines here. You see these orange lines? They represent roads. In the ancient map of Israel, they represent the trade routes. Okay, there's one trade route that goes north to south along the mountains, or the valley, it's called the Jordan Valley, on the east side of the Jordan. That road is referred to as Derech HaMelech. There's a similar road along the coast that goes Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, that goes all the way up north into Tyre into Lebanon. That road is referred to in the Torah as Derech Eretz Plishtim, the land that goes along the coast, goes down to Egypt. But two parallel roads, one north-south on the east side of the Jordan, one north-south along the coast, don't meet. The only intersection between these trade routes in the ancient world ran through the valley of Emek Beit Shan and Emek Yisrael. And we're going to see in Sefer Shoftim the story of Devorah and Barak, in particular, in Sisera, in the army of Yavin Melech Nan, that this Melech Hatzor, that this road, this control, this territory was central to the control over the region. And if suddenly into this area of Menashe, I have a Canaanite king by the name of Bezek, who's asserting control, and 70 kings who have claimed willingly or unwillingly loyalty to him, suddenly he presents a strategic threat to the settlement of Israel. Not the first strategic threat, nor the last strategic threat. Sefer Shoftim is filled with them. And it's almost as if the Navi wants us to start this Sefer with the recognition that in the aftermath of the death of Yeshua, the Canaanites tried to assert themselves again. And here is Bezek, and Adoni Bezek, trying to assert himself, Canaanites and Perizzites. And so what was necessary at that moment was not just for a tribe to go into their region and conquer and settle their region, but what was necessary for that moment was to reassert a national army. And a story we're going to see over and over and over again in Sefer Shoftim, where the leaders, the Shoftim, tried to gather the tribes together, not just one tribe, but many tribes, to fight together as one nation, as one people. Devorah sings her entire Shira as a praise for those tribes that did come to the battle and a critique of those tribes that didn't answer the call and come to battle. That's the sub-theme of the Sefer. And so when Bezek presents a new threat to them, and Adoni Bezek, in his control of the region, we need to fight against an answer. Who's going to lead us? And the answer was Judah will lead. And so Judah was called on to lead not just in their territory, and we'll get to that at the end of the second half of the parak, but in this opening campaign, this is about making sure that the Canaanite presence does not reassert themselves as a strategic threat, existential threat against the nation and against the tribes of Israel. That's the battle of Bezek. It's a major battle. Adoni Bezek is a major king. 70 kings under his table. And Yehuda needs to set an example. And so they do to Adoni Bezek what is very un-Israel-like of them, but they felt they had no choice. Send a message to the rest of the Canaanites. That's the significance, I think, of the fact that they are that this battle, Yehuda Barishon, is not just Yehuda will settle their tribe and their territory first, but this was an effort in the aftermath of Yeshua's death, a need to reassert a national campaign, a national tribe, army, and bring together the forces to be able to put down the efforts of Bezek to reassert himself, Adoni Bezek. And that's the question of the Ve'tumim ve'yishalu b'Hashem mi ya'alelanu barishana. It's very similar, by the way, at the end of Shoftim. If you look in chapter 20, which is the last story of Pelegesh Begiva, there too, although there it was a civil war, but there too they wanted to all gather together. Ve'ish Yisrael yitpaktu levad mibinyamin 400,000 ish. They gathered an army of all the tribes of Israel, Ish Yisrael, united army of Israel, 400,000. Vayakumu v'yalu Betel, they went to Betel, to the Mishkan in Shiloh. Vayishalu be'Elokim, and they asked God. Vayamu b'nei Israel, mi ya'alelanu batchila le'milchama b'nei Ammon. There it was a civil war, but nonetheless the question was the same: who should go first? And the answer was the same: V'yomer Hashem, Yehuda batchila. Yehuda goes first. That's precisely what you have in the opening chapter of Shoftim, a national campaign, not a tribal one. in which Yehuda goes first and leads the people in the campaign to stop Bezek and Adoni Bezek, and therefore to stop the reassertion of the Canaanites as a force of an existential national threat to Israel in the aftermath of the death of Yeshua. From that point forward, the rest of the parak will deal with whatever Canaanites are left in the land, but not as an existential threat, but as enclaves, pieces. The Canaanites remain in their place in the land of Israel. The Israelites remain on the mountains, remain in control. This insurrection of Bezek, or Adoni Bezek, needed to be stopped in its place, and for that, a national army was pulled together under the leadership of Yehuda. That's assuming that Bezek is in the north. So those are the two options. Either Bezek is in the south, and it's part of the flow of all the postscript, all the early stories from Shoftim that Yeshua, that we are repeating here, or Bezek is in the north, and this opening story is unique because it needed a national campaign to stop a major possible threat to Israel that was asserting itself in the form of Adoni Bezek, king of Bezek. I'm going to stop in a minute and take questions. Before I do, however, I want to add one postscript to this discussion. Because if what I'm suggesting, which is that the battle of Yehuda leading with Shimon at his side, is a battle that's focused here in the area of Emek Yisrael, Har Gilboa, Emek Beit Shan, the tribal territory of Menashe, it may help resolve another mystery. And the other mystery is, I showed you the Psukim in Yehoshua, that Yehuda was not given their own tribal territory. Part of the reason has to do with an event that took place in Chumash. We're going to take a good look at that whole story of Shimon next week. But one of the mysteries is that it's clear in Sefer Yehoshua that Shimon is given territory in the south region of Yehuda. In fact, if I go back to that map, you see this is the tribal territory of Yehuda, and this is the area given to Shimon, Beersheba, area of the Negev. And that's where he is, in Sefer Yehoshua and in Sefer Shoftim. What's the mystery? Many years later, when the kingdom is split, and the southern kingdom is led by the descendants of David HaMelech, and the northern kingdom is led initially by Yerovam ben Nevat and other kings of Shevet Ephraim. The southern kingdom is comprised of how many tribes? 2.
Binyamin
and Yehuda. The line that splits across the north and the southern kingdom is this line of Beit El. And that's why, if you know the story in the Book of Kings, Yerovam ben Nevat places an idol in Beit El, the Agalim, one in Beit El and one in Dan in the north, right, to kind of bracket or bridge the two parts of the kingdom. Northern kingdom starts from Ephraim north. How many tribes are in the northern kingdom?
10.
10, right? Reuven, Gad, Menashe, Ephraim, Dan, Yisachar, Zvulun, Naphtali, and Asher. I counted 9. Should I do that again? Reuven, Gad, Menashe, Ephraim, Dan's in the north.
The extra is Shimon.
Naphtali, and Asher. I have 9.
The extra is Shimon.
It's Shimon. But how did Shimon get to the north? Shimon is in Yehuda. You see the problem? The truth is that it's somewhat of an optical illusion, because if you take a look I'll show you 2 places in Divrei Hayamim where we see that Shimon doesn't stay in the south. One is in 2 references that are almost identical. One is the story of Asa, king of Judah, Asa, whatever the story is. I'm going to skip the story itself. And he wanted to take away all of the idols from the area of Judah and Benjamin. And so he starts a campaign through the land to remove all the idols. Vayikvotz et kol Judah uVinyamin. So he gathers together all the people, and now he's going geographically through the country. Judah uBinyamin, the Hagarim imahem, and those who lived with them. Me Ephraim, uMenashe, uMishimon. If I'm geographically navigating through the country from Yehuda north, Yehuda, Benjamin, Ephraim, Menashe, Shimon, Shimon is north of Menashe. That's in chapter 15. I'll show you another story. Many, many, many years later, in the story of Yoshiyahu, Ben Shmona Shanim Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu also goes through a campaign to remove all the idols in his land many, many years later. And he goes through the entire region. Vayiteheret Yehuda v'et Yerushalayim. Uve'arei Menashe ve'Ephraim ve'Shimon ve'ad Naphtali. In the cities of Menashe and Ephraim and Shimon all the way up to Naphtali. In other words, it's clear that by the time Divrei Hayamim comes along and the later years of the Book of Kings, Shimon is not in the south anymore. They are long since have traveled northward and are now sitting in the area where, as it would happen, in the area of Menashe, in the area of Emet Beit-Shan, in the area of a territory that they fought hard together with Yehuda to defend. So even though in Sefer Yoshua and in Sefer Shoftim, Yehuda's in the south and he's given land in the south, it could very well be that the aftermath of this story was that Shimon felt they had some hold or some claim to the region in the north, and therefore years later they're shepherds, they need grazing land, they head north and they head out of the Negev area and they head into the area of Emek Yisrael, into the area of Emek Beit-Shan, and that's where we find them in Sefer Devarim. So that is the story of the Battle of Bezek and the significance. And it's fascinating as I've looked at these two options of how to read the story, and they both appear in different books and in different summaries of the Book of Shoftim. It fascinates me that they revolve around the question of what seems like a technical question: where is the city of Bezek? But the impact of where the city of Bezek is changes the dynamic of the whole story. So those are the two possibilities that I share with you. Questions? Yeah.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much. All the issues that are brought up have to be resolved. It's interesting. You compared it with Shaul, who goes to battle for the people of Yavesh Gilad. So that's the only time the country is united under him, and it will take a descendant of Yehuda, namely David, to unite the whole country.
I'm not sure that's a correct assertion with regards to Shaul.
It seems like after that, it's just a constant battle of loyalties and whatever.
There's a whole period of time of Shaul's leadership that we tend to gloss over, which Shaul unites all the tribes together under one banner before David HaMelech comes along, and before the jealousy with David. But that's as I said last week, when things are going well, all Tanakh tells us is the land was quiet for 40 years. Yeah. So we don't always have a perspective on the length of time that things go well.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the 70 kings, I mean, I think 70 is that typological number, meaning correct. Everyone, a lot, or complete everyone. And the idea of taking off, I mean, losing an eye, we think is horrendous. But if you lose your thumb and your big toe,
can't fight.
You cannot function. It's worse.
Well, you can't fight. You cannot fight as a soldier.
You can't pick up a piece of anything. You can't.
From the perspective of a king trying to subjugate an army, that's how you subjugate the army.
They're worse than slaves. It's wonderful. Thank you for this class. Is
I have-
it also
I have
possible
a
that
tip.
there are two Bezeks? Like there were two Beit Shemeshes? and
There's
they
not only is it possible, if you do a quick search in Wikipedia, which I did just because I thought it would be fun, there's a third Bezek.
Huh.
There's actually a third Bezek in the Golan.
Wow.
So yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Somebody else have a
Another
question?
different question. They bring Adoni Pesach to Yerushalayim at the end, and he dies there. So I'm a
Right.
little confused.
That's probably okay, go ahead.
I mean, Yerushalayim is conquered many years later by David. I mean, who is Yerushalayim belonging to?
Okay, so hold that question until we get to the next pasuk, which is pasuk Chet, in which it says that Yehuda conquers Yerushalayim. And then in the same breath says that the Jebusites in Yerushalayim, they were unable to conquer. So in the same verse, literally.
Yevusi.
So hold that question. We're going to have to spend some time analyzing the status of Yerushalayim versus the Jebus. Yerushalayim is a region, and the Jebusite hill is a fortress in that region. And so they conquer Yerushalayim. They conquered Yerushalayim in Sefer Yoshua. But they don't conquer the Yevusi, Yoshvei Yerushalayim. So there's a distinction between the region and the fortress that we'll have to look at later when we get to those verses.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. We will see you, B'ezrat Hashem, next week. It's good to see everybody back with us.
31. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Thank you.
You
Great
too.
night to you. Thank you.
Thank you.